And that concludes the first official service for former President Jimmy Carter inside the Carter Center, bearing his name, honoring his time as President of the United States of America. The wreaths there beautifully designed with 39 white roses signaling his time as president. It was our first time hearing from family members. His second son, Chip, got really choked up just talking about the emotional moments that he had with his father later in life after his presidency, being able to spend time with him. I'm Aisha Howard here with longtime 11 Alive News anchor Jeff Hullinger. Ron Jones welcoming us now from our 11 p.m. newscast. Ron, you were here the night that all of this happened on last Sunday, and now we've arrived here at the first official service. Wow, what a moment.
It really is a moment. So, and I remember that it was just after 4 o'clock. We're getting ready for the 6 p.m. newscast, and all of a sudden, one of our producers said that the 39th president has passed away. So immediately we're scrambling, trying to get ready and prepare, you know, the viewing audience with what we're going to have for breaking news. But what I found fascinating is once we got on the air, just the outpouring of love, you know, from not just here in Metro Atlanta and across the state, but from around the globe. So it turned not just mourning the 39th president, but I felt like it was a celebration of life, just like we witnessed today.
Yeah, and what we are seeing here play out today has been in the works and well thought out, well planned. There's so many special moments that we saw there, and maybe some that we even missed because there were so many moments that were personal to him. Jeff, you shared about one of the songs that were played as the honor guard was lined up outside that had special meaning in multiple ways to President Carter as well.
Well, first of all, the Morehouse Glee Club never disappoints.
Oh, fantastic.
They are extraordinary. They make the hair on your neck stand up. As always, the Battle Hymn of the Republic with an arrangement that is at least a century old. I mean, it was just a beautiful service, hearing from Chip Carter, sort of emotion, talking about the price the presidency played on the Carter family. Amy was just a little kid at that time, and trying to find time with your parents, you had to schedule it. I mean, that's a very sobering thought. But Aisha, you mentioned at the beginning of this service, as they brought in the casket, they played Hail to the Chief, and there was a certain irony in that when Jimmy Carter first came into office in 1977, he wanted to get rid of some of the trappings that Richard Nixon and previous presidents had employed so much. Hail to the Chief is played every time a chief executive walks into a room. Jimmy Carter wasn't into that. He stopped it. But there was such an outcry around the United States of loving this tune, this bum, 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 that he reinstituted it. And he told 60 Minutes in an interview that I saw over the weekend, last weekend, that was about 15 years old, that it was a mistake. He said he should not have gotten rid of many of the trappings, most notably Hail to the Chief is something that he erred on.
Yeah, absolutely. And the military honors that, and a lot of civilians across the United States, they see that as a symbol of honor for the commander-in-chief as well.
We're just looking live here. The family had a personal moment right at the end of the service, and now, Jeff, what I would assume would be maybe Carter Center employees there, or close family members able to pay their respects. We know the public isn't allowed to come in and pay their respects there in the Carter Center until 7 p.m. That's 7 p.m. and our producer confirms that these are the staff members. I think they said over 300 staff members there at the Carter Center. And Jason, Chip said, they just kind of thanked Jason for being the one family member to sort of take this on and to sit on the board there. He serves as the chair of the Carter Center Board of Trustees. But just think about all these people who are now left with this legacy and what to do with it and how to fulfill all of these dreams and all of these stats that we're able to ramble off about what the Carter Center has achieved nationally and even more internationally.
Yeah, and President Carter, as you know, he laid the foundation for the Carter Center to continue with what they're doing, not just here within the United States, but around the globe as well. And 100 years, that's a long time. And many times those of us in my generation, we're thinking about the golden years and retiring and moving on. But Jimmy Carter was just not that person. He was going to do it to the very end.
Absolutely right. And look, I think this is such a beautiful venue for this as well. You see how light and the glass has framed the casket, and it gave absolute, even a sort of visual meaning to what this experience was all about. It's a very famous parcel of land in Atlanta. This is where some of the Union soldiers were watching Atlanta being burned in 1864. And this parcel of land sits high, and it has a great view to the skyline, great view to the city. I guess as I was watching this, I was thinking about, sitting in a television studio watching Ronald Reagan here in 1985 as they opened the Carter Center, and it was a parcel of land that at that time was sort of surrounded by a lot of duress, a lot of neighborhoods that were in bad shape. Nobody was quite sure the future of that area of Atlanta, not that far from Ponce and all, but we have seen this sort of redemption and resurrection and renaissance of Atlanta that really is a symbol of Jimmy Carter in many ways. I think there is a visual metaphor to be found, and certainly Jimmy Carter's life served such a grand purpose, not only in Plains, not only in South Georgia, but in Atlanta, where he made his mark, and then on to Washington, D.C. and back. And this was a place where so many consequential decisions were made during his lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. And Aisha, you had talked about this earlier in the broadcast, that a lot of times presidents, they go on the speaking tour, they may launch a book or two, but that is it. But Jimmy Carter always kept his hands dirty, whether it was dealing with Habitat for Humanity, traveling all across the globe, trying to eradicate disease, trying to build hope with others as well. He just refused to give up, even after his presidency. And even though he had some trouble during that presidency and a lot of controversy, he did not let that slow him down.
I remember in elementary school, kind of aging myself here, but we had
not like Ron and I.
Yeah, we had president's class, and so of course, we learned about each president. We spent a week on each one, and it was phenomenal. And at the end, you had to be able to say all the presidents. And dear God, I know I can't do it now, but it wasn't until I relocated here to Atlanta in 2019 that I came to sort of revisit the life of President Carter. Right, so beloved here and was still doing so much work. And I remember when we, sort of got to the point of these back-to-back falls that he had, and still showed up to Habitat for Humanity builds, just sort of banged up and bruised up, and was still there with hammer in hand, wearing a hard hat with Rosalind right by his side. And so, Ron, when you say just kept getting his hands dirty, that is quite literal here, and just sort of refused to give up. One of the most touching portions of this service for me was from Pastor Tony Loudon, his personal pastor, saying what he will be doing on a Saturday. He will be making the journey to Plains to have service with President Carter. And over the last 22 to 23 months, while he was at home in hospice care, he was propped up with a blanket with Psalms 23 on it, and that was the scripture that Pastor Loudon read from. And it's just interesting to think, we only knew that he was in hospice, but to hear a few personal stories of even how the family sacrificed. Chip's wife was a part of the circulation of family members who had to go. You don't want, even though they thank the hospice workers, you still want to have that family presence there, someone to be there with him during that time. And just the schedule they'd all set up to go and sit, which meant Chip was away from his wife for 2 weeks at a time because she was there for her father-in-law. So I just thought that was so special to hear the level of sacrifice that the entire family put in, not only during the presidency as children, but also in their adult years, what this meant to show up for a man who served our nation.
You're absolutely right on that. Jill Stucky has been with him for more than 30 years. You will see her in the video in the days ahead. She'll be in her parks uniform, her national parks uniform, and she has led the federal government's charge of taking care of President Carter and looking out for him, and has been such a great family friend and has meant so much to the Carters, and she's an example of that. That there have been so many people that have given their lives to the Carters, and she's one of them. And there's so many that we don't know by name, but we know their sacrifice, we know their service to the Carters, and ultimately to our country.
Yeah. And we see them here getting that personal moment. These are the staffers of the Carter Center who are just able to have this time before this venue is open to the public here, beginning at 7 p.m. And we know there's going to be a large crowd. There's going to be a lot of traffic impacted. And, you know, we just sort of have to just see our way through it and be patient, knowing that, you know, from here, he will travel on to Washington, D.C. before returning home to Plains. So this is just really a moment etched in our history for sure.
What's so amazing about Jimmy Carter, and I keep thinking about it certainly as we get ready to have the public view the casket tonight, is how, you know, men and women who have great accomplishment, who are able to make it in this life, generally sort of disassociate themselves from the rest of us. They lead these lives behind gates and large homes, and, you know, run in a very, very high class of successful people. The Carters were not like that. They never, ever lost that. They were always among us for as long as we can remember. If you're eating pizza in Midtown, you've seen President and Mrs. Carter somewhere over the last 40 years, or at Manuel's, or, you know, pick a restaurant, you'll probably see a framed picture of the Carters somewhere in that restaurant in 2025.
And, you know, I think it was probably driving the Secret Service crazy.
It had to.
Had to, you know, because think about this, and we've talked about this about a week ago, and that is he was teaching Bible school, Bible study, or Sunday school, right? So as he was speaking, as he was doing Sunday school down in Plains, he had a crowd of people around him. He had a lot of folks around him at church. Think about the Secret Service who had to try to navigate through all of that. But President Carter did not care. That did not matter to him. He was still going to be touchable and relatable to the public.
Let me tell you, Ron, wherever there was a big Atlanta event, at one point you could see Jimmy Carter. I was getting ready in the radio booth to do the broadcast of the Falcons and Broncos in the Super Bowl in Miami. So we're minutes away from kickoff. Hey, look who's coming through. It's President Carter. and it was just the way he lived. He was always among us. No matter the event, whether a Super Bowl or a hot dog at Manuel's, he was there, and he was never one to sort of disassociate himself from the masses.
No, and I think we witnessed that today. You know, his son and his grandson talked about the line of people who were along the streets as the motorcade came by. They were there to salute, put their hands over their heart, just paying homage and saluting the 39th president in their own way, just showing how much they really love him and honor him, and based upon what he has done in his life.
I'll tell you, there's so many of us too that have always talked about this. When you would see him at a Falcons game or a Braves game or any of these places, people always said, what will it be like in Atlanta? What on earth will it be like when he is not here? What will that feel like? What will that look like? Of course, at that time, nobody assumed that he would make it to 100, where he, you know, would not be able to be, you know, the sort of Energizer bunny that he historically had been.
Exactly. What a story of a fighter. I mean, how many times did the family prepare? There were injuries, there were illnesses, there was skin cancer that spread to his brain, and it's like, no, not yet, no, not yet. And so, you didn't anticipate that you wouldn't be able to see that reality play out until 2024. But, you know, here we are in 2024, and I really think that moment that the family experienced in the motorcade, I think that sort of warmed their hearts so much, because it gave them something back for so much that they'd sacrificed in their lifetime, to say, wow, these people are caring about, it's not just our father, but caring about our family, because showing up is much for them as well. To say, you know, thank you for what you gave too. You talked about just how young the baby daughter was while all of this was taking place. So I think it's so important for the public to continue to show up in this way, and even for all those staffers. And God, the longest president to have Secret Service.
Yes.
Since 1975. You know, I think we took for granted here in Atlanta, one of the great pleasures and privileges of living in Atlanta for decades is the fact that we were among all these lions, whether it was Congressman John Lewis, it was Reverend Lowry, it was Jimmy Carter, you know, Ambassador Young, Ralph David Abernathy, Coretta Scott King. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. These people that changed America, that were giants of the 20th century, that we always assumed that they would be here. Somehow or other, we viewed them as non-mortals because they had accomplished things that mortals could not. But they're now gone mostly, and it is a very different Atlanta. Bernie Marcus part of that as well. These people that have defined living here, that have made all of our lives better in ways that we can't begin to describe, now are no longer with us. Who will fill their shoes? No one has the answer to that, but I think it has been a privilege to be in this city and to be not only among these individuals, but to actually touch the flesh and know them.
And there is a great deal of responsibility left on our city tonight, and we'll see how it plays out in the years to come. Who will take the charge?